I can only begin by repeating the sentiments that many Lords have expressed about the amazing, powerful work of Grenfell United. People who are victims, survivors, families who have, through their grief and suffering, fought to say never again. Also, as many noble Lords have said, to say pay tribute to the brave work of so many firefighters and emergency staff on the night on the ground. I want to begin by reflecting on a personal experience. In 2007, there was a fire that in many ways presaged later tragedies. It was in a block called Bucklebury on the Regent's Park estate in Camden. The staircases, the fire escapes filled with smoke because the fire doors had been removed. The firefighters had to use breathing apparatus to evacuate the residents. Now, I know about this because I had been, until a couple of months before, a resident of Bucklebury. And I had noticed, using the fire stairs, that some of the doors were missing. And I rang the council up. And I assumed that that had been dealt with, and I was moving house, so I didn't think about it again. And yet, when we heard the reports of the fire in the excellent local newspaper, the Camden New Journal, we found those fire doors had not been fixed. We moved forward 2 years to an incident that many people here have referred to, Lucknow house fire. Now, my noble friend Baroness Jones was part of the London Assembly inquiry into that fire, and there were lessons from that fire that said the stay-put guidance had to be reconsidered, and noted that there was no plan in place for changing that advice to get out. That was in 2009. Now, the noble Lord, Lord Byrne, and the noble lady Baroness Brinson both referred to the fact there's very strong evidence of how sprinkler systems could make an immediate difference. Yet we're 2 years on from the great tragedy of Grenfell, and nothing's happened. And I think we've heard again and again on many different points a call for action. And we really do not want to be here next year and the year after and in 5 years' time making calls for the same kind of actions, as I can look back to 2007 as I was calling for action on fire safety in tower blocks then. Now, I also don't want to go over the ground. There's been many powerful points made already, so I want to follow the lead of the Right Reverend Prelate, the Bishop of Durham, in looking at some big systems issues here that are behind what happened in the tragedy of Grenfell. And your Lordship's House will hear me often talking about the need for transformational system change. Now, I used to be a newspaper editor, and one of the stories behind the Grenfell tragedy is the loss of local newspapers and local newspaper journalism and reporting. Now, there was a very powerful website, the Grenfell Action Group blog, that drew attention to many of the issues that are now covered in this report. And there was, in fact, a local journalist called Camilla Horrocks who reported for the Kensington and Chelsea Chronicle in 2014 on issues particularly around fire safety and electricals in Grenfell Tower. Now, what happened was, later that year, the newspaper closed down. Those stories disappeared off the internet. When the residents sought local journalists, or indeed, and we have to ask other journalists, London journalists, why they hadn't picked this up to report their concerns, there was nothing there. Now, my noble Lord Hendy, in his very powerful maiden speech, made reference to the Leveson inquiry. And the undelivered second part of that inquiry focused on the concentration of media ownership and might have looked at the lack of local media coverage. And if we are going to have democracy, if we are going to have safety, we need strong local media. Now, to address another systemic issue, I am going to go back to February 2017, when it was posted on a government website details of an anti-red tape agenda on new build properties. In a separate report about the same time on fire inspections, it was being boasted by the government that these fire inspections have been reduced in some cases from 6 hours to just 45 minutes. There's a very lazy phrase that we hear not just, I'm afraid, from one side of this House or one side of politics. We're going to cut red tape. And I would ask your Lordship's House to consider every time you hear that phrase to think about Grenfell and to think and replace the words red tape with the rules and regulations that keep us safe at work, in our homes. I really had this driven home to me back in 2014 with a meeting at Green Party conference with the brilliant Hazards campaign, which focuses on safety at work. And they have a phrase, better red tape than red bandages, which is one they've repeated often since. So, my lords, we have to focus on the issues about cladding, about safety rules, about the resources available to our emergency services. But we also have to, in looking at Grenfell, look at some very broad systemic problems in our society and the need for transformational change.